Give me just 1 second. Okay, let's go ahead and get this show on the road. Apologies for the delay this morning when we got all those sound issues worked out, but I think we are all good to go. Whew. Thank you all so much for attending today's webinar on records management and practical applications of records management. My name is Charlie Taylor, one of the CE consultants at KDLA. I'm going to be facilitating the webinar and just helping out today in the background. If you have any technical issues with things like sound or anything with the system, please feel free to use that chat function to let me know, and I'll do my best to get that worked out for you. If you haven't used the chat before, you'll find it in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. You'll see a little purple button with an arrow on it. You click that and it will expand a panel on the right-hand side. And at the very bottom is a little chat bubble. And you just click that chat bubble and you'll be able to see the chat. I just typed in a message for you all to see. So that's how you will use the chat. Ask that we hold questions until the end, just make sure she gets through all her content to see if the questions get answered as she goes along. But please feel free to chat those in as we go along, and I will go ahead and collect those questions, and then we'll get to them at the end of the webinar. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be available in our online portal within just the next couple of days. And the webinar is being live captioned. You should see an option to, if you haven't seen it already, there should be a bar at the top of the screen asking if you'd like to see the live captions that will show on your screen. We also have a service called Stream Text. I'm putting the link to that in the chat right now. If you click that link, it will bring up the captioning in a separate tab, and you can sort of manipulate the captioning. You can make the words, you can make the font larger, things like that. So some people prefer that. You have that option. And I believe that is it. So apologies again for the late start, but we're going to go ahead and get going. So I'm going to go ahead and mute myself and turn it over to our presenter. Becca, you want to come on and take over?
Absolutely. Can you guys hear me? I'm going to assume yes. So thanks for having me. Again, I'm Becca Holdmeyer. I'm with the local records branch at the Kentucky Department for Libraries and Archives. We consult with local government agencies about records management and records management programs. Like Charlie said, please feel free to ask as many questions as you need. I generally do ask to put them in the chat and get to them later because I am very easily distracted, and this way I'll be able to make it through and go from there. So welcome to Records Management and Practical Applications. The goal is for this to go about 40 to 45 minutes and leave time for those questions. In the event that you can't think of your specific question, please feel free to contact us anytime. I'm going to have a contact slide at the very end. RAs, we're always available to answer and help with records management issues. So I'm going to, for this presentation, I'm going to briefly go over what public records in Kentucky are, what is records management, and some information about some electronic records, email, and social media before getting into retention schedules and destruction certificates. I think it's very important to have an understanding of these basics to make using the retention schedules and destruction certificates make sense, and also to understand why records management is important. You'll probably notice that I jump around to a lot of different topics, go back and forth, and it's only partially because I do talk like that normally. A lot of stuff with record management is so interrelated and moves around as well. So bear with me, and like I said, any questions, please feel free to ask. Okay, so I'm going to start with why is records management important? So by identifying and managing your office and agency's records, you will be able to document the work that you're doing for the agency, minimize the duplication of documents, keep records safe and accessible, and finally, properly dispose of your records when they have met their retention. Local government agencies are required by Kentucky law to maintain and preserve adequate and proper documentation of agency functions, policies, decisions, and essential transactions. So when we put it in the most simple terms, records management is important because in Kentucky, it is the law. Okay, so Kentucky Revised Statute defines a public record as all books, papers, maps, photographs, cards, tapes, discs, diskettes, recordings, and other documentary materials, regardless of physical form or characteristics, which are prepared, owned, used, in the possession of, or retained by a public agency. Basically, recorded information is a record. Public records do show evidence of government activities. So all government records are public records, but some public records are not open records because of the exceptions in KRS 61.878. Any record that does not have an exemption under the Open Records Act is available to the public. We always suggest contacting your legal counsel regarding open records requests and questions. You're more than you could definitely come to us and ask questions, but if it's an open records question, we are 9 times out of 10 and probably 10 times out of 10 going to also tell you to contact your legal counsel with those questions. I'd also like to note that regardless of size or type, records management statutes and regulations apply. So regardless of what kind of record it is, the records management statutes do apply. So this is where I'm going to pop in the first tip. And right now, it might seem like a big one, but it's one that I'm going to be pushing hard for every agency. It's always been a suggestion that the local records branch gives to know what you have and to create an inventory, but more than ever, we're going to be pushing for it. Sorry to make a slight plug for the next presentation about disasters and records, but the bottom line is that it's basically impossible to prepare and recover records from a disaster if you don't have any idea what records are there. Plus, it's going to help you organize your essential and your vital records from non-essential and vital and non-vital records, and also permanent from non-permanent. It's important. If there's one thing you strive for or want to start with, I think it's this. This is the one, to know what you have and to create an inventory. Okay, so this next slide, this is from the National Archives. So once you know what records are, you need to understand that they have a life cycle. It starts once the agency either receives or creates the records, and then the active record is used and maintained. The final stage is disposition, which is not only destruction, but it could be preservation and storage of records which are no longer active. All 3 stages of the records life cycle are interrelated, and therefore an agency should have a records management program that supports records from one stage into the next. Many times different life cycles can even be stored in different places. So the records formats. So KRS definition of a records, again, states regardless of physical form. Remember that records can take many forms, and this list is definitely not all inclusive. Also remember for later in the training that a record can take multiple formats. Things like you could have a record that is in both digital and paper format. So a record is considered the same record regardless of how it is kept. Content is going to determine your record series and retention, not the format. We suggest maintaining records in the format most appropriate for your agency's needs. If your records are accessed less, it's okay to maintain them in paper format or store off-site. And in Kentucky, as long as a non-permanent record is accessible and accurate, it's at the agency's discretion whether they are kept in paper or electronic format. So if you have some records that are non-permanent and you need to access them regularly, you could scan them and get rid of that paper as long as it's non-permanent, or vice versa. If you want to print it and store it somewhere, feel free. So the second tip that I have is to have a designated records officer or a records person. This can be amazingly helpful. Different departments may have different needs or records, but having one person who kind of serves as a clearinghouse or someone that you can kind of funnel questions and issues through can really help make things more efficient. Okay. So these are the most common types of records we see, but again, that does not mean that you don't have others in your offices. So iReadable, just like it sounds, things like paper or physical photos or even microfilm. And then there's the machine readable, where you obviously have to have a machine to read those type of things. So records with a non-permanent retention can be retained electronically or in paper, regardless of how they originated. Again, you can be moving back and forth between those formats depending on what your needs are. However, always remember that permanent records will be different and have stricter format stipulations. So permanent records that are originally created in paper must be maintained in an iReadable format. They must be retained as that original paper. If the permanent records are born digital, they can be maintained permanently digitally. That does not mean that if you have a permanent record that was created in paper, you shouldn't scan it for preservation or access. It just means that while you do those activities for preservation and access, you do need to still keep a hold of that original paper document. And I'm positive that there will be questions about this. This is one of the things that we get a lot of questions about, how it originated, and just basically partially because technology has changed. So things used to be created in paper and now they're created digitally. These questions are totally normal. Feel free to hit us with them as often or as much as you need to. And again, a reminder too that permanent and long-term records that are kept electronically do require active digital preservation programs. Just because you are keeping it in an electronic format does not mean you can kind of forget about it. We'll get to that a little bit later as well. Okay. So no local government permanent records may be destroyed without prior approval by the state archivist KDLA commissioner. Scanning or digitizing or microfilming permanent records does not mean that you can destroy the physical paper copies. These must also be retained and preserved. Keeping them electronically will help, again, with the security backups, easier access, and preserving the records by limiting the use. Again, local records branch can help with best practices in preserving paper records long term. There's also, and I know another tip I'm going to get to later about the electronic records branch, so I'm going to leave that there. Excuse me. So here is another way to look at this. And again, if you ever have questions or you're not sure how long to or in what format to retain records, please contact us. I do, again, and this is, I've probably said it 10 times already, but I want to point out one thing one more time because it's such a common question. On the right side of the slide under iReadable permanent retention, if a permanent record is born paper, you can create microfilm of that record for security or create digital image for easier access. But again, the paper remains the official record and must be preserved. So now that we've talked about what makes a public record and who is responsible for them, it's time to kind of discuss how to go about managing them. If you look at records individually, it's a lot. It can seem very overwhelming, but records management programs can help categorize records into groups and makes it so much easier and so much more efficient. So as a records management professional, I have to give you this definition of what records management is in that gray, the systematic control of recorded information, regardless of format, from original creation to ultimate disposition. Every office creates records, which may be in paper, microfilm, electronic, or some other format. In reality, though, records management, again, it's knowing what you create, how do you maintain it, and how and when to get rid of it. Or even, more simplistic, I made this record, what do I do with it now? So a records management program, again, sounds very detailed, but again, in reality, it can and usually is pretty simple. I created it, I keep it this long in this format place, I destroy it, and I record that it's been destroyed. It's an ongoing process, and most agencies actually have some form of a records management program currently in place. It just might not be recognized as such. So getting those policies and procedures in place kind of just cements it and makes sure everybody understands what's going on. But again, it's probably already happening. So you've probably seen several of these principles during the training, and you're absolutely going to hear me talk about them again. Public records must remain usable and findable for the life of the record, or the life of the record or the retention period. just a quick note that there might be some confidentiality and privacy considerations for certain type of records. We're going to suggest that if you have any questions with that, to contact, again, both your legal counsel, and you can also contact us. We'd be more than happy to give you some assistance with that. So the destruction of records must be authorized and approved by a retention period. Your authorization to destroy records actually is the retention schedule. It is created by statute. So if you're following that, you are doing authorized and approved retention periods. Again, if records are kept past their approved retention, they are still going to be subject to open records laws. So destruction of records should not occur before the approved retention has been met, but if you need to keep them longer, if they're useful, you're more than, there's nothing that says you have to keep them only for that retention period. As long as they're kept for the retention period, it's up to your discretion of how much longer you keep them. So then this third bullet is that records retention is going to be agency-wide. Every employee who creates, receives, or maintains records is in some way responsible for records management and retention. So again, employees each have responsibilities and stakes in their records management program. So I've got tip number 3 here is to train staff to recognize the records they create and include them in the records management process. Again, another plug for records officers to kind of help manage and facilitate some of that. And they can also be seen as kind of a coordinator for those activities. This slide is basically just another way to look at the whole records management process, remembering that each step might look a little different for each category or series of records. Honestly, this might be my favorite slide. I really feel like it encompasses the whole of what records management does and why we do it. So basically, you're going to start with, again, you want to know what you have. You want to have a records inventory and understand the records retention schedule as it relates to your records. Then you want to know where it is. If you know what you have, that's great, but if you don't know where it is, it kind of negates that whole purpose. And then you want to be able to access it, which these kind of things can include things like having an active records management program, knowing which of your records are active and where they're at, understanding that there are electronic records involved in that, and then also knowing that inactive records management is a thing. If you have records that you have to keep for retention, but they're not actually being used, those are inactive records, and you still have to keep them per the retention, but also knowing kind of where and how you can access those. And then getting rid of what you don't need when you don't need it, which things like records disposition and records destruction. There are definitely valid and good reasons to keep a record past the retention period. If it's being used in your agency or office, or it's needed for some reason, by all means, keep it as long as needed. However, there are records that are just not needed anymore. They've met their usefulness. They've gone through the entire life cycle of the record. At that point, they're just taking up space and time, and they're just sitting there waiting to, get in the way of everything else. And again, if there's an open records request, you'd have to produce those. So we always suggest that if you're not using them, if they've met retention, go ahead and get rid of it, which will lead you to that fourth box, which is protecting what you do need. If you know what you have and you know that you've gotten rid of things that you can get rid of, then it does make it much easier to protect what's left and protect those vital records that do need protection. This is also going to very quickly move into that disaster recovery planning. It's going to help with that process and also with, again, those vital records protections. Again, this is my favorite slide. I think this just shows the entire process. Yeah, I've gone on enough about how much I love it. Okay, so now we have some more about records management programs. So a program should include filing system, which should be maintained and used consistently. Established policies such as naming conventions and procedures are best. It's good to have a standardized system in your agencies that is both, again, understood and implemented. It should include conventions that everyone can follow with common names and standardized dates. This part can be difficult to get everyone to adhere to, but if you make any progress in this direction, it's absolutely worth it. We always suggest that whenever possible, that using the name listed on the retention schedule can help with destruction later. It's going to make filling out those destruction certificates and filing those just that much easier. So this tip number 4 is, again, the more consistent you can be with your record keeping rules and naming conventions, the easier it can be. I always suggest labeling boxes with series numbers, dates, the destruction date that it can be destroyed at, titles, and etc. And to keep records divided by records, not just throwing them into a storage box as they're created. Store them by use and record series when at all possible. This is the same for naming conventions for electronic files and folders. There's nothing worse to me than an electronic file folder or a file name that is just a whole bunch of computer generated names or printer names. You're just looking at a file full of images that have no context, and it's going to make that so much easier or so much harder to deal with long term. So then, which kind of leads into tip number 5 here, our records cleanouts are faster and easier if they're done regularly. Just do it. It's most likely not going to be the most fun the first time, but it's going to feel great to have it done, and it's going to make it so much easier to do the next time. It's suggested to designate a time to clean up paper and electronic filing systems. It could be at the end of each month, at the end of each calendar or fiscal year, or even as projects or cases close. Again, there's not a lot to say other than it's never going to get easier if it's just left. It's only going to get bigger. It's only going to pile up the longer it sits there. Plus, again, this is another plug for disaster training, is that having them clean and organized is a real bonus in any disaster. At that point, once you've experienced a disaster, it's kind of too late to do that clean out. Now you're just left with dealing with them as they are. Okay, so effective records management. We always suggest normality. Again, records management should be systematic and regularly followed. We suggest a timely destruction of records. Records should be destroyed as needed, but you must also follow legal holds, which suspension of destruction in the case of legal holds. Proper documentation. Always suggest completing and filing destruction certificates with KDLA and reviewing your records management program. Review it regularly, how the records management practices are implemented, and definitely update them as needed. So setting up a records management program and going through the honestly sometimes hard and sometimes arduous work of going through all of your records doesn't mean a whole lot if the program's not continued. This is going to be an ongoing process for the life of the agency. Otherwise, next time you're just going to have to start all over again. So these 4 points can kind of take a records management program from just kind of an idea and a really great theory to an effective system. I don't like to call these ones tips because really it's just records management. Okay. So we're going to kind of move into format considerations. This slide kind of considers whether records should be kept in a physical or electronic format. This is again going to be something that I'll kind of touch on throughout this training, and also remember that there is the consideration of how it was originally created if you're looking at older items. So physical items, things like the paper and the photos and stuff, they can be stored and ignored under optimized conditions with the expectation that you could always go back and access them at any time. So if you've got them in a box in a storage room, you always assume that you could go grab that box and pull those records out at any time. So contrary to what is thought a lot of times, digital records cannot be stored and ignored because they are dependent on hardware and software, which does and can become obsolete over time. Record data can become trapped in old file formats. It definitely has happened. To prevent the data from becoming trapped, it's important to plan media migrations and periodic upgrades into your records management programs. So this applies to proprietary software formats and then also records kept in electronic systems as well. So this is where I get to my tip 6 and also a push for, there's KDLA has an electronic records branch, and they are also available for technical questions regarding electronic records. They also have guidance available. So feel free to contact local records branch with questions like this. We might pull in the electronic records branch if we're getting into like the real technical aspects, but just knowing that they are another resource out there available. Okay, so I'm going to look at why would you choose electronic records. The benefits of electronic records is they can be more easily accessible. You could just be sitting at your desk and pull some up. If those electronic records are well organized, it can simplify open records requests, or even they don't even have to be open records requests. It can simplify finding the records and using it. And then secure digital storage and backups are great for disaster prevention plans. Unlike stacks of paper, you will have the advantage with having an offsite electronic backup. So then there are also some concerns on the flip side. You might have, again, thousands of disorganized, unidentified files. It can seem impossible to apply retention periods to digital files. And then there's always kind of that thought about why wouldn't we just keep them forever? So while all of those are things to think about, when electronic records have met their retention, they really should be destroyed and treated as all other records format, including suspension in cases of litigation, pending litigation, or ongoing open records disputes. Do not keep these records forever just because they're electronic. If you have the record, your agency is obligated to produce it regardless of whether it has met retention. Also, looking at it that and this is becoming more and more the case, is that electronically or retaining records electronically is not always cost effective. Storage of electronic records can be and become very expensive. So having that built into your records management program is important. So this slide is very important, but in reality, I also think it's most applicable to records that were not created digitally. In most cases, records that are created electronically just stay in that format, so you're not even going to be deciding whether to choose it. So which kind of leads to this tip 7. Inventory electronic records and include electronic records on any agency destruction timeline or calendar. We talked about having regular cleanouts and destruction, so go ahead and build electronic records into that. There's probably a million different ways you could look at cleanouts, and doing them the easiest and most efficient way for your agency is always going to be the right way. One option is to have separate times to do cleanouts and destructions for electronic records versus your paper records, or you could do it by departments. You could even do it by series. Things like if you have the same record in multiple formats, you could do those together. However you can make it easier and more efficient, again, is always going to be the right answer. Okay. Email. So email is obviously a type of electronic record, and it is one of the most common topics that we get questions about. I do have an asterisk up there because it can also apply to texts. Email messages and text messages are public records. They are subject to open records requests, and they are discoverable in legal proceedings. I cannot stress tip 8 enough. Ignoring email will not make it go away. Do not ignore email. So email disposal. So destruction of email can be kind of confusing. Things like deleted folders, which is this tip 9, recognizing that most delete folders for email I can't even think of the word I'm thinking of, email providers, Outlook, Google, all those things. Deleted folders are not necessarily deleting them, they're actually just holding folders. Also making sure to recognize tip 10, that email deletion again should match your retention schedule. So deleting emails as you're done with them might not actually be matching retention. So this view on the right hand of the slide is just, honestly, it's a snip of my own email. I'll give you the slight caveat that local agencies will use L series number M, and then, local agencies will use L numbers, so L and then 4 numbers. However, KDLA, we're a state agency, so we have to use the M for our own, which, this is a total side note, just drives me crazy because I spend all day dealing with L series and local agencies, and I don't remember the M ones, but that's neither here nor there. So kind of as an example, in my email folder, I have, under the archive, I have folders for the destroy by the date. So things like routine correspondence, which we'll get to in another couple of slides, is a pretty common email series. So I know that things that I'm looking at now that are routine in 2022 that are routine correspondence are a 2-year retention, so they can be destroyed in 2025. So as I'm ready to delete those, I put them in that destroy 2025 folder, and I know that in January 2025 I can go through, fill out my destruction certificate, and delete that. So if you go up to under the deleted items, this is showing that I have deleted those 2021 and 2022 folders. But again, they're just sitting in a deleted folder. They haven't actually been deleted. I have to go in and actually empty that folder. Again, it's just kind of an example of how you could organize some emails if you've got a way that's working or a better way. If you're doing it and it's meaning retention, that's the way to do it. So email is not the record itself. It's merely the format. It's the communications medium. It can be seen as the envelope. If someone were to ask you what the contents of your record are, you're generally not going to say email. You're going to say what was contained in that email, and that's where you're going to find that record series. So in theory, an infinite number of record types and record series could be sent via email. Each of those could have different retention periods based on the applicable retention schedule. So we're always going to say follow your retention schedule. While in theory an infinite number can be kept, in practice there's very common types that we see. This is where the majority of your emails are going to fall. And actually, I'm going to say that the majority are going to fall in that routine correspondence, information and reference material, and non-business related messages. Although official correspondence can occur in email, it's just not quite as common. So delete email, but again, document it on a destruction certificate, which we will get to. So then you're also going to want to make sure to delete messages that are not needed, things like transitory messages, information and reference that you're not using, spam and other business related messages. Okay, so moving slightly away from email into social media. Another topic this is just another topic that we get a lot more attention lately is social media used by local agencies. I'm going to just very briefly go over some main points. This is again not a tip, but another just informational. There is an available guidance document from KDLA from the electronic records branch, and I believe we also have one in the local records branch regarding social media. So some common challenges with social media are on the slide list. Record keeping in a collaborative environment. These are things to keep in mind, that it's entirely possible that multiple people across the agency are responsible for posting on a social media site. So you need to figure out who should be and who is responsible for the records management for that. You have content located in multiple places. Content could be posted on multiple social media sites, or it could be saved locally or on a server. Again, where is that record copy? Where's your official record? And then identification of record series. Like we discussed in email, the possibilities are pretty much only as many as there are in the retention schedule. But again, you're probably going to be limited to the same few. The implementation of record schedule, storing records on outside platforms and across sites is automatically going to add a few steps for destruction and retention. Then there's also the capture of frequently updated records. Capturing records, comments, etc. before they are deleted can seem overwhelming. There are things called crawling software that can be used to periodically save information. Again, these should be include kind of a clean out and crawling schedule on responsibility in a records management program can really make that easier. And then things like handling of records containing personally identifiable information. These are considerations that, again, need to be included in any records management program. Who and how will this be dealt with? Not all challenges or benefits are included here. Again, there's quite a bit of information in that social media guidance from the electronic records branch. So then for tip 11, again, just to address these challenges, agencies should articulate clear processes, policies, and record-keeping roles and responsibilities to ensure social media records are identified, managed, and captured. Honestly, for tip 11, we could take out social media and pretty much plug in anything to ensure email records are identified, to ensure electronic records are identified. Tip 11 is just a pretty all-encompassing tip for records management. A couple of social media reminders that agencies may discontinue the use of social media platforms at any time. It does not relieve the agency of its records management duties and requirements. Think of things like, I really doubt this has ever happened, but what if an agency had a MySpace account? If those records are still on there and they haven't met retention, you've got to keep it, or you need to look at destroying them if they have met retention. Social media may include comments or other postings which are inconsistent with an agency's policies and may require removal from the site. Problematic comments or posts on social media that are threatening or seriously offensive can be removed per an agency's policy. Also, if there are threatening or problematic posts, it does not mean that they have to remain publicly viewable as long as they are retained securely. There are ways to turn off those forward-facing comments and posts while still being able to access them. Okay, so now I'm going to switch gears and discuss retention schedules and series. Again, this is probably a really good spot to remind you that this is a lot of information. We understand that there's a lot of information that goes into records management, so please don't feel overwhelmed. You can always refer back to these trainings. You can always come to us for guidance. You can ask the same questions 10 times, whatever you need to do to get to work it. That's what we're here for. We're here to consult and guide you guys through this whole process. So this is a description of a records retention schedule and records series. Both terms you've probably heard me already say a million times, and you're going to often use as you create and use a records management program. And then a few points that I'm also going to make later. Kentucky records retention schedules are not the only retention schedules available. Depending on the type of record, they may also be covered under other schedules, including federal schedules. If you have a record that has both, that falls under a series that is both, has a state, falls under a state schedule, and also could fall under a federal schedule, keep it for the most restrictive or the longest time period. Your agency will be covered regardless. And then a reminder to be specific when you're trying to figure out what your records are. Things like making the distinction between payroll registers versus monthly registers, those type of things. Okay, so listed are the types of schedules for local records. Note that all agencies will use the general schedule, but some agencies also have an agency-specific schedule for records that are only created and or housed in that agencies. Some example of the common records that are covered under the general schedule include things like personnel, financial, and payroll. Things that are covered only under the library schedule are things like patron transaction or KDLA certification, things that only libraries create. A couple more notes that schedules are not creative. Don't try to force a record into a series. If you can't find a series, contact local records branch. And actually the next slide, I'm going to talk about finding series. And then also to remember that retention is not based on the level or involvement, but on the record contents. So one task in a long process will still have the same requirement for that type of that record series. So things like, I'm trying to think of a good example for that. If you've got like an invoice or receipts, it doesn't matter how big or small they are, they're all in that same accounts payable or accounts receivable series. And that might not have been a great example. Another thing to note is that all local agency schedules can be found on the KDLA website. And we always suggest using this online version. These schedules can be updated quarterly. So that's where the most current will always be. So here I'm going to look briefly at an actual records retention schedule. Again, they're all located online. They regularly updated. For instance, this local government one was just updated in June and had a few changes. Nothing, the whole schedule was not updated, but there were series within which were updated. And I imagine it will also be updated again in September. Okay. All records retention schedules will have a signature page. Note in the top right-hand corner is the schedule date that is required for the destruction certificate. It's basically to make sure that agencies are using the most current version of that schedule. There are things like there is a change date in there. Again, that was the last time any changes were made to the schedule, but what you're looking for is that schedule date. So for this one, for the local records general schedule, it's the June 12th, 2014 schedule. That was the last time the entire schedule went before the commission for approval. So this is a page out of local records general schedule. I have, for some reason, chose the fire department in there for that, but it kind of just shows you what the record schedule looks like. To note things like the all record series are assigned a unique number, and they're all L numbers for local record or for local government agencies. All series will have a title. The title is the first information that you're going to help determine if your record series matches your records. When completing a destruction certificate, you're going to list both the record series number and the title from the schedule. You can also include agency-specific titles or what you call them, whatever you need for your own records on that destruction certificate, but we also ask that you do include the actual retention schedule title as well, so we can kind of verify that. There's the function and use section, which is exactly what it sounds like, the function, purpose, and use of the records. There's access restrictions, again, exactly like it sounds. It's good practice to always consult your legal department or legal counsel regarding access restrictions. Then we have the contents. Content section describes the information found within the record. This is where keyword searching is really helpful. If you open the online version, you can always use the Control F for the keyword. It will save you a ton of time. And then finally, the retention and disposition tells you how long you need to keep the record or when you can destroy it, conversely. So don't be surprised if you have records that you just can't seem to find a place for. There are thousands of local governments in the Commonwealth, and there is a possibility, in theory, that everyone calls them something slightly different. That's why local records branch is here. We can definitely help. We can walk you through some questions to see if we can work together and find the best series. You can also ask your counterparts in other cities, counties, associations, or listservs could also help. One common example of this I always use is timesheets. Most people look for timesheets as a keyword, and you're not going to find it under timesheets. It actually falls under time and attendance. So if you keep searching for timesheets, you're going to just spend a lot of time and never find it. But if you ask me, or if someone who's already done that, could help and save you some frustration. Okay, tip 12 is not everything in your office is a record. I don't like to get to this slide too early because I don't want it to be the takeaway that not everything is a record. I want you to understand that a lot of what happens in agencies and offices will be a record. This is kind of just an aside that not everything will be. These are things like blank or unused forms. Definitely not records, just get rid of those. There are also some records that do not need to be kept, including duplicates, reference, or personal documents. Duplicate records are copies of records that are kept for convenience or records purposes. There are so many situations where multiple offices possess copies of the same records. When they are destroyed, they should be listed as duplicate on the destruction certificates. And if you want to know, you can also add, like in parentheses on the destruction certificate, what the series was that it's a duplicate of if you'd like. For things like duplicates, you need to mention, though, you need to recognize who is responsible for keeping that official copy. So not everybody thinks that they have the duplicate. Someone has to have that official copy. So communications is always important. And again, another plug for a records officer to help out with that. And then tip 13 is to include these types of records in regular destructions. They can so quickly add up and can overwhelm space and time. If nothing else, keep them together. Sorry, I noticed my time is getting a little low, so we're just about there. Records cannot legally be destroyed without the authorization of a schedule. The default retention period for records not listed on a schedule is permanent because there's no authorization to destroy them. If you do come across records in your office that do not have a correlating record series, they cannot be destroyed. The record series, again, is what provides the retention information and their authorization. This is an example of when you're going to come to us for assistance, and if we need to, we'll create a record series for it. Okay. What makes destruction legal? These are some basics. So destructions are determined by the records retention schedule. The agency must designate one copy as the record copy to meet retention requirements. Do use the KDLA destruction certificates, and then destruction certificates are, ironically, a permanent record for your agency. A copy should also be forwarded to KDLA. Destruction should always be part of the normal course of business. The on-time destruction of records the on-time destruction of expired records is important. Again, I've said it several times before, but if you receive open records requests for records that have met their retention but have not been destroyed, you must provide them. Again, I also want to point, though, that if you have records that have met retention but you're using them or they're needed, you're not required to destroy them. The retention schedule sets the minimum time records should be retained. Make sure to have clear policies and filing protocols to determine where and who has that record copy. Destruction of records must be suspended in case of litigation, pending litigation, or an ongoing open records dispute. When in doubt, contact your legal counsel. Okay, so we're going to go quickly through some destruction guidelines. Once you've decided what can be destroyed, it's important to know how it should be destroyed. Confidential items should be shredded or recycled in a locked bin. When in doubt, treat them as confidential. Other records can be disposed of in a landfill. There is an entire guidance document about destruction guidelines available on the KDLA website. Again, always consider your access restrictions. A destruction certificate should be filed and filled out with KDLA for all records that have met retention and are destroyed. Reminder that these destruction certificates, again, become a permanent record. They are used to show proper procedures and to show when and how records were destroyed. Basically, this destruction certificate shows it is proof that your office created a record. It shows proof that you kept it for the full retention, and it's proof that it's been destroyed. It kind of shows the entire life cycle of that record right here in one handy document. So it looks more daunting than it really is. This schematic gives an overview of what goes into one. It can also be sent as an email guidance. So I'm not going to go over all of the pieces of the destruction certificate itself. I do think that this guidance is very helpful, and it kind of shows you what goes into it. We've gone over mostly what goes into it, so this is kind of just a reminder. And then tip 14 I have is to use previous versions as templates. If you have a destruction certificate that you filled out, it went through KDLA, you didn't have there was no clarifications needed, it's been filed, just use that as a template again. It's why reinvent the wheel if you've already gotten it through once. Okay, so to kind of end this training, I'm going to go over a few final tips and reminders. So tip 15 is to identify your records and then know how they are stored. So know where they are stored and how they're organized. So again, identify, then categorize. Get rid of what you don't need when you don't need it. And conversely, keep what you need to keep and know where it is. And then a reminder that permanent records cannot be destroyed without prior written approval. And that's also a reminder to complete and submit destruction certificates to your regional administrator. There is a lrb.destruction@ky.gov. There is, and that's on that schematic or that guidance document as well, where you can send destruction certificates if you'd like to email those in. We have quite a few helpful resources on the KDLA web page. There are several linked here. There's plenty of guidance documents. If you're looking for more specific information, let us know. We're always looking for ideas for more guidance documents. So again, questions, let us know. And then finally, because I just said questions, let us know about 5 times. You can always contact the RAs. They're listed here. We're split up by regions, just like the library regional administrators. The boundaries are slightly different, so if you contact the wrong one, no worries. We're all doing the same thing. Just contact one of us and we'll either get you to the right person or get you the answer. We're here to help, so anything that we can do, please let us know. So this is where I'm going to open it up for questions. Again, with the understanding that if I've totally broken your brains at this point, that you can come back to us at any later date and ask again. So thank you for listening. And again, questions, let me know.
Thank you so much, Becca. Let me just breeze through these last 2 slides that I have. Thank you to the Institute of Museum and Library Services for their sponsorship of this webinar and our other services at KDLA. And then we have some additional contact information if you need to get a hold of us in continuing education. And just a couple little wrap-up housekeeping notes while you all chatted any questions. And I actually have a question for you. So the webinar was recorded. It will be available within the next couple days in our online learning portal. And I'm putting a link to a survey about this training in the chat now, just a real quick 4-question survey, and your responses are very important to us. The PDF of today's slides is available in Blackboard Learn, back in that original room where you accessed the webinar link. At the very bottom, there should be a section that says Slides and PDFs. If you click on that and expand it, you'll find the slides there. And if you're attending this live, you'll get a certificate of attendance within your learner dashboard within about 1 week. And not seeing anyone else's questions, I'll go ahead and ask mine first. So when you were talking about electronic records, so I'm thinking of specifically email. And so you said, and I may be totally, I've been through records management training and it's still just so foggy, and I'm always asking questions. So when you get a non-business related message, you know, baby shower or we're going out to lunch or whatever, and it said immediately delete them, so you don't need to do destruction for non-business related messages.
That is something that we have talked about quite a bit. There is a series number for it, so it could go on a destruction certificate. If you're putting it, and this might be one of those cases where having those deleted folders as kind of just a holding folder might actually be helpful, that if you're once a month going through and deleting that deleted folder, you could find out the size of that folder and put it on a destruction certificate. One thing that did not come up in this training that I probably need to go back in and add is that every time you destroy something, you do not have to immediately turn in a destruction certificate. So if you're periodically, like if once a month you're emptying out your email, and once a month you're writing, this is the series and these are the date spans, you can wait until that whole destruction certificate's filled up to turn it in. So keeping track of kind of that, yes, you were receiving non-business related, is always great practice. But yeah, that's a tricky one because it does have a series, but yes, it also says delete immediately.
Okay, that's good to know. I'm glad I'm not the only one with that question.
It's very much a non-answer answer.
It helps to move it to a folder and save it once a month. That's a useful tip. And also didn't know the thing that you didn't have to immediately fill out the certificate, so that's good to know as well.
Yes. Yes.
And
So
I'll
if you've got,
pass
if
through.
it takes, yeah, it could take 6 months. You could fill it out and send it in once every 6 months. We do get some that come in once a month just because it is periodic and it is regular and that's how it is done. And that's fine. Those are, once they start coming in and they are regular and everybody knows kind of the checking of those by us is very quick and we just send those on. So really whatever's the most helpful.
Gotcha. Okay, and we have a question from Deborah. I fill out a destruction certificate and turn it into the records officer. Do I need to keep the electronic destruction certificate, or does the records office keep the paper copy I send?
I am assuming that the records officer is within the agency. So as long as one of those is the official copy, the other one is considered a duplicate. So just determining who has that records copy is what you want to do. If your records officer is keeping it and understand that that's their permanent, that they have the permanent copy, you can keep yours as long as you want, get rid of it when you need to. Conversely, if they're assuming that you're keeping the permanent record, then you would keep it permanently. So again, it's just determining who has that official record.
Creating that workflow and policy procedures type
Yes,
thing.
absolutely.
Very good. Okay, and she says thank you.
Well,
And
you're very
haven't seen
welcome.
any other questions come in, so I guess if you don't have anything else to add, we'll be all finished for today.
That works. Yeah, again, I know this is so much information that coming up with questions off the cuff is not the easiest. So again, send them in as they come in, as often and as many as needed. That's what we're here for. So again, thanks for having me, and any other questions. Again, I've said that a million times also, but I'll keep saying it. Questions, as many as you've got.
It's always helpful to reiterate that. We tell you guys that too with certification or CE. That's what we're here for. So please bug us. That's what we're here for at KDLA, to serve you all. Thank you all so much. Thank you so much, Becca, for your time. And if you all haven't signed up, the second webinar in this series is is 2 weeks from today on disaster preparedness and for your public records. So you can go ahead and sign up for that as well. And it will be Becca presenting again for us. Thank you all so much, and have a great afternoon. And whenever you're ready to exit, you can just click the X on your tab to close it out. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Becca.